Hello, soulmates. Hope the weekend was good. Plenty to talk about today. Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. I'm Courtney Hicks.
And I'm Nicordelai Corte. You know, each day we're honored to stand behind this desk to take you on a journey across Black America. And we know that there are a lot of places that you can go for news that focuses too narrowly on our blues. But here at FOXSOUL's Black Report, we aim to share stories that reflect our rhythm and blues, rich with informed perspective and analysis. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments for two cases involving the University of North Carolina and Harvard, the nation's oldest public and private universities.
Now, the challengers to the university's programs have lost at every step as lower courts have rejected their claims that the schools discriminate against white and Asian American applicants. The U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is sitting out the Harvard case because she was on an advisory board until recently, but she is taking part in the North Carolina case, which strongly suggests the court would use that case if it ends up making a major pronouncement on affirmative action. Every U.S. college and university the justices attended, except one, is urging the court to preserve race-conscious admissions. A decision in the affirmative action cases is not expected until the later part of next spring.
That's a big case. It's going to have far-reaching consequences. You know, a lot of people have this confused with previous cases that looked at whether or not quotas were admissible. You know, looking at whether or not universities could use quotas. The Supreme Court said no on the quotas. You know, that's too narrow a use of race as a factor. But this case is about considering race among a whole bunch of factors. I had a chance to listen in on the oral arguments this morning, and one of the questions that came up that Justice Jackson presented, she said, well, wait a minute, you know, if there are 40 different factors that are being considered in which race is one of them, what's wrong with that?
For me, when you talk about affirmative action, I'll be 52 at the top of the year, so I remember it being a huge conversation and really pushed by the likes of the late Colin Powell, and how he was a staunch supporter, even though folks from his then Republican Party did not necessarily agree. But his argument was, hey, if it wasn't for affirmative action, I wouldn't be here. And I want to say the beginnings of affirmative action was to sort of kind of minimize this moving target when it comes to Black folks and reaching the heights that we should be able to reach in whatever area and aspect of this country. In particular, we're talking about, academics here. And it was also, put in place to equalize, those opportunities. And so I don't know if things have gotten lost in the sauce or if, affirmative action has lost its potency or has been redefined. But in the beginnings, that is what I remember as affirmative action being put in place to do. So. Yeah,
and growing up in California, I remember when Prop 209 was passed, Proposition 209, which eliminated race-conscious admissions from the University of California system. And there was a dramatic change in terms of the makeup of the folks that were admitted to University of California schools. And so, there are several states where race-conscious admissions, are not legal. And this case, again, will have far-reaching consequences. And so they don't expect a decision until next year, 2023. But we're going to keep our eye on this because so many of us, we talk about lifting as we climb, so many of us would not be here. We wouldn't be sitting at desks like this.
Had it not been for
affirmative action, creating a way out of no way.
Indeed. We'll keep tabs on this story. So what's the real deal when it comes to Black folks and how we feel about defunding the police? With the midterm election quickly approaching, Republicans are sounding the alarm across the country and claim Democrats are soft on crime and the only way to fight it is with policing. In a recent poll, 3 out of 4 Black voters said criminal justice and policing is a very important issue when they head to the polls this November the 8th. Black Democrats and Black Republicans are evenly divided about policing, and this makes Nicordelai a great lead into our guest who could shed some light on this split.
That's absolutely right. We're joined by Renee Hall, the former Dallas police chief. She also served as deputy police chief right here in Detroit, where our headquarters is located. Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so very much.
Yes, honored to have you. And so after George Floyd's murder, protesters in the summer of 2020, they shouted the slogan, you've heard it, defund the police, a phrase that's rooted in a decades-old call for local government to redirect money from police agencies to other forms of crime prevention. The movement did force some cities to examine how to rethink police budgets, but nearly all major police reforms failed. In your view, has the opportunity for nationwide police reform, has it vanished in the current political environment, or does meaningful local police reform remain possible?
You know, I don't believe, thank you for the question. I don't believe that the possibility for reform has vanished. I believe that the people have spoken. The polls that you've provided says that 50% of Americans really want police reform. And so the question is, are we going to give the people what they want? After spending more than 2 decades in law enforcement, what we understand is that we have a system that if it were in any other capacity, if it were corporate America, if it was the health industry, any other industry that was causing harm to the American people, we would make some adjustment. We would call for the product. We would say, how is it harming individuals? And we would make those necessary adjustments. And I believe that this country must do the same thing as it relates to policing. Now, am I saying that all policing is bad? No, I've spent, as I said before, more than 2 decades in law enforcement. And I believe in law enforcement in this country and in this community. But what I do realize, as most Americans understand, is that there are systemic issues, there are some cultural issues that challenge policing, and they must be addressed. And until we do that, we are delegitimizing what law enforcement stands for. I believe that we are putting the safety of not only the community, but police officers as a whole in jeopardy. And when we talk about defunding the police, I don't agree with defunding the police. When you look at police budgets across this country, 88% of the budget is police salaries, and the other 12% is operational costs. What I do support wholeheartedly is ensuring that cities all across the United States focus on those things that support law enforcement, the violence intervention handled by the community crisis intervention professionals who can assist law enforcement, because what we see is that officers all across this country are handling situations that they should not be a part of. They were responding to homelessness, individuals who are experiencing homelessness, individuals with mental health crisis, and that's not what police were designed to do.
Chief Hall, you're not alone in being against defunding the police. In President Biden's first State of the Union address earlier this year, contrary to claims by Republican leaders that the Democratic Party wants to defund the police, he took a hard line by saying, quote, we should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police with resources and training they need to protect our communities, end quote. As former Dallas police chief, as a former deputy chief of Detroit, can you make the case for how increased police funding makes Black America safer if we don't also increase police accountability?
So I think you've answered the question. There's no one without the other. We must ensure that the police agencies in our country, when we're focusing on that training, that we're actually training them about the true history of policing, about what it means to show up in a uniform in a Black community when the history of the Black community and police is slave patrols and, you know, in the 60s and Jim Crow into civil rights, sicking dogs and water hoses. When we allow individuals to understand that that is the foundation between communities of color and law enforcement, that needs to be factored into the training so that officers know when they show up with an understanding from the community that there is tension. And so how we show up becomes important in allowing us to show up different. So unless there's a true understanding and reform around what police what we mean to communities and the legitimacy of who we are when we show up, there is no one without the other. Mm-hmm. We must continue to push that. Police agencies need resources in order to do their jobs. When we look across this country today, crime is real. And in order to address the crime in communities, you need police to be able to do that. But you need police to show up and understand who they are policing and understand how that community needs to be policed, because the Bible says in all things to get an understanding. So once we know who we're policing, what their needs are, we're able to do that differently. And I don't want to negate this fact. There is an equal standing for academics across the country that poverty is a direct correlation to crime. So we're going to have to look at what is actually causing crime before we can talk about reform and or policing as a whole.
Chief Hall, there is so much more for us to talk about, but we are out of time. But we would love to have you come back here as this story continues to whip up interest across the country. Our thanks to Renee Hall, the former police chief for the city of Dallas and the former deputy police chief for the city of Detroit. Our thanks for joining Fox Soul's Black Report.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
A major settlement payout is coming from the city of New York as they're expected to pay $26 million to the men wrongfully convicted for the murder of civil rights icon Malcolm X. 3 men were convicted back in 1966 for the murder. However, Muhammad A. Aziz and Khalil Islam were exonerated last year after a 22-month investigation found documents proving their innocence and that was withheld at the trial. The $26 million settlement will be split evenly between the 2 men. This is big.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Maybe not enough.
Yeah.
As far as not being able to get back 20 years.
Yeah.
But how long as children and as every Black History Month rolls around, or the birthday of Malcolm X, we've kept up with his family over the years. How long has this story and the effects of that assassination been a part of our dialogue? And for years later for this evidence still to be coming out. It just sounds like the tip of the iceberg to me as to, the continued cover-ups and conspiracies that we've kind of muddled over and argued over and debated and talked about years on top of years, not only the assassination of Malcolm X, but many others, including MLK and so on and so forth. Yeah,
and it's not lost that, that story is coming out at a time where we're seeing an uptick in political violence across the country. And so, just another example of how long it takes for us to really, reconcile our past with where we say we want to go in the future.
Or for there to be some sort of justice.
Yeah, accountability.
Exactly. Former President Barack Obama is making a return to the campaign trail in hopes of warning voters about what he calls, quote, threats to democracy. Obama started in Georgia on Friday, asking voters not to blame inflation on other issues sorely on President Biden and the Democratic Party. Obama says the Republican Party is not the go-to for answers to our economic woes and wants more focus to be placed on the methods being used for voter suppression.
Also looking to use the help of President Obama, the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Mandela Barnes. Political experts say that his fate could lie in the hands of Black voters in Wisconsin. Barnes, who was raised in Milwaukee, currently serves as lieutenant governor, but in order to become the state's first Black senator, he's going to need to gather more votes than Senator Ron Johnson, who has won the past 2 terms. Yikes. Yeah, that's a lot. Now off to Maryland, where Democratic candidate Wes Moore is working to make history as the state's first Black governor, while Representative Anthony Brown is looking to be Maryland's first Black attorney general. If elected, Democrats would regain control of the governor's office after an 8-year Republican administration. Now, only 2, count them, 2 Black politicians have ever been elected governor in the United States, and not one, it's been a Black woman. Not one black woman has been elected governor in these United States, but that may change. That may change. Voters in Georgia, they're surging. Early voters are, and Stacey Abrams and her campaign are making a valiant effort to get out the vote, and so we'll see what happens.
Indeed, some history yet to be made.
Yes.
All right, coming up, the NBA says it's keeping a full court press on everyone from the White House to the fans to keep Brittany Griner's name top of mind and bring her home. We will have more coming up on Fox Soul's Black Report.